1. What? What happened in a particular situation? Replay the event in your mind as though it were happening in front of you on a movie screen. What do you see? Be as objective as possible. Try not to attach any judgments at this stage. Stage 2. So what? Analyze the experience more deeply. What was important about the situation for you? How does this experience connect to course concepts? What did you learn? Stage 3. Now what? This stage is about applying what you've learned. How have you changed or grown because of this experience? How will you think or act differently in future situations because of this experience? What are you going to do next? Remember, whatever you are reflecting about, be sure you...
I'm going to go ahead and stop us there. So you think about it is the what, the so what, and the now what. Now you saw that we indicated that it wasn't recorded at the beginning. Don't worry, because guess what? I've done this webinar in one of our blended workshop series, and I'll show you where you guys can get that at the end here. So don't worry about if it wasn't recorded at the beginning. I know we are recording now. So when we think about data, I want us to think about not just the data, but I want to think about what are we doing with it? What, so what, and now what? So as we're going through today, start thinking about that reflective practice on you, because this is an opportunity for us to grow our personal growth in our instructional practices. So as we're thinking through data, what we want to do is we want to, first off, let's demystify data, because I know some of the things that came up here in the chat is saying that we have lots of data out there. There's tons and tons and tons of data out there. So what we need to do is kind of let's dial it back, because I don't know about you. Every day when I was teaching, I would come home and I didn't even want to make any decisions, because we use data every day, right? 35,000 decisions are made on an average every day. 35,000. And look at that, 220 are just made about food alone. So there is data all over the place. So I'll demystify this for you just for a moment. So let's think about this morning, because Janie talked about, oh, it's kind of cold, right? So the weather. I mean, just trying to determine what to wear. How much data do we take in on that? We try to figure out what the weather is, and we try to ask ourselves, well, am I going to go outside? Am I going to stay inside? Well, if I am going to go outside, am I going to be active? So maybe I need to wear some active clothes. If I'm going to just go outside and sit on the back patio, what does that look like versus if I'm going to stay inside and I'm going to go work in a business, or if I'm just going to go down to the coffee shop. So we're taking in data all the time. So what we want to do is we want to start thinking about the reflective practice that goes with that data. When we're in our classroom, there's this broad range of instructional data. And today we're going to really be talking about how do we use not all of this data, because I'm going to tell you there is so much data we can get overwhelmed, right? 35,000 decisions. Well, heck, if I've got 30 kids in my classroom and every minute I collect data, I can be way up that so much faster. But there's so much data out there. We have to ask ourselves, what data is going to help us feel not overwhelmed, but help us drive instruction, right? So we're really trying to think of what's going to help us drive instruction in the moment. So when we think about warm-ups and surveys and exit tickets and all this different data, and it was great when we saw that Jackie at the beginning showed us how to use Google Sheets, right, to help coordinate some of that data. That really helps as well. But what we want to think about in a data-informed instruction is using data that's going to result in what comes next in instruction. So really, when you're thinking about how do I use data to drive student learning, well, I need to know what comes next in the instruction. I need to get some data right away that's going to help me figure out what comes next. So I want to collect that data. I want to analyze that data. I'm going to make some decisions about it. I'm going to plan and reflect. And I've got to do it quickly, because what comes next in instruction might be 5 minutes from now. Or it might be the next day, the next period day, if I'm dealing with a secondary student or a secondary classroom. Or it might be, the next hour. So it's really important to think about what data we're collecting. And oftentimes it's the formative and not the summative at the end of the learning, because we're trying to look at what comes next. Even if we did summative, I'll tell you, I taught high school math for 10 years. And oftentimes I would get to a point where we'd take a quiz or a test at the end of a learning period. And I'd look at that data and I said, that's really good data. But because my benchmark says I have to go to the next thing on, the next day, we were already into the next thing. And it didn't help my students, nor did it help me as a reflective to change the way that I was doing my practice. So we go back to that what, so what, now what? How are we using the data to reflect on our practice? So here's an example. Daily instruction, right? Start at the beginning. Some data that I'm getting input on is who's in class and who's not. And when they're walking in class, what's their demeanor? Maybe somebody's sad or maybe sick. Then we might have a warm up, and then we look at how students are engaging, some conversations, and checking to see who's on task. Then some assignment is given to the students to do, and we're hoping that they complete it. And then, well, not only did they complete it, did they really master it? And then hopefully at the end of the lesson, I'm doing some exit ticket. Think of all the data that's going on in there. How is that going to help us drive what's going to come next in instruction? So it becomes really important that all of this data, yes, gives us a lot, but too much, really. What we want to start looking at performance data. The warm up can give me data that's going to inform today. So it might change the way I present my lesson. It might change the way I set up my small groups. It might change the conversations that I'm going to have later in the classroom. And some of those conversations, again, this is data to inform, might tell me something about an individual student and where they are. The mastery of the assignment, as well as the exit ticket, is data that I can use to inform tomorrow's lesson or tomorrow's instruction. Now, all this data is a lot of really good data, but we need to be really careful on is that some of it's good performance data, but some of it is just behavioral data. And behavioral is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to help me drive instruction and tell me what's going to come next in the lesson. So we want to be really cognizant of the what, the so what, and the now what, the data points that I want to collect. Notice in this one, there are only 3 circles. So I don't want to collect a whole bunch of data. I want to make sure that I can stay focused on what needs to be done. So when we think about driving daily instruction and driving student and learning, I want you guys to think about how often you are collecting and reviewing instructional data that drives instruction. So let's go ahead and do some breakout rooms. I like to have about 3 people in each room. So let's go ahead and let's make 4 rooms. We'll make it 4 because we got some moderators and stuff in here. So let's go ahead and do 4 rooms. Mary, I know you're going to set up some rooms for us. So when you're in your room, what I want you to do is I want you to think about how often you are collecting and reviewing instructional data. And we'll make this about 5 minutes.
All right, so I have the rooms. I'm going to open them up. And I will bring y'all back in 5 minutes. They should be open and available for everyone to join. Please let me know if you have concerns.
All right, we have about 3 to 4 people in each room. Thank you so much, guys. Karen, are you with us? Did you not find a room?
I do have one with 5 people in it. Would you like me to move anybody or leave them?
No, just leave them. That's fine.
I figured. There we go. Now it's just us. Yeah, that's the only odd one. So bring them back at 9:54.
Yeah. Next time you do groups, you don't have, it'll use these same groups so that people will be able to, if you don't close the room, I mean, not close the rooms, but when you do breakouts again, they'll give them in the same rooms. So it'll be really
I just had it do automatically, so it should keep them.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, and it'll keep them. So the next time we do breakouts, they'll be in it.
Okay.
And we're going till 10:30, right? Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I got so enthralled with your introduction. I was like, oh crap, I need to hit record. I did.
That's all right. That's all right.
And I was like, thank you, Kim, for saving me. That was a great save, by the way. I was like, oh no.
Yeah, let me find that while we're in breakouts.
Provide specific
Excuse me.
Sorry, I've got 3 little dogs.
So I want to welcome you.
Pardon?
Nope, I'm good.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I just, I had to find the video from when I did this back in March.
Oh,
So that way they'll have access to it.
sorry, my smallest dog is the loudest one.
I guess I could have done breakouts because you gave me as a co, right? So I could have done that.
No, it's fine.
Okay, cool.
I need to do something besides mess it up. Which is also on the recording, so there we go.
Yeah. So did you see a black screen pop up in the middle of the video? That's because when you did the recording, it popped up on top of my video. And so it created a black screen on it.
Ah,
It's no big deal because like I said, this is all, I've done it previously. So they'll be able to see that earlier. And
now
right
I understand what you mean, because I never would have known about the black box without you telling me.
And if you're still recording, if you didn't pause right now, guess hopefully you had some really good discussions in your breakout rooms about when and how often you're collecting and reviewing instructional data. Guys, this is really about thinking, how can we use data to drive instruction in the moment, right? That's really what we're talking about today. Because when we're talking about using data to inform student learning, I'm not talking about 3 weeks from now, 2 weeks from now, or when that big test is coming down the line. I'm talking about in the moment. Really trying to think through how do we drive that instruction totally in the moment. So again, when we go back to the welcome back, everybody. I'll just make sure I welcome everybody back because I know we just finished up in the rooms. Thank you guys for taking the time to talk with each other. Now, remember, there are so much data out there that we can be overwhelmed by it. So our key is not only just collecting and reviewing the data, but we want to be able to get data that's going to help us drive instruction in the moment. Like what's going to help me in this particular lesson to make some changes immediately, or what can I collect in this lesson that's going to help me understand and change some lessons down the line. So when we using data to inform instruction, what I like to say is let's use the CIA, or curriculum instruction and assessment, of blended to get there. So let me define blended for you. I like to say that blended personalized learning takes these 3 components. Now, I told you I taught high school math for 10 years. So I really simplified this. We're going to take the wisdom of our teachers, because you guys are super smart. So smart that to be able to get a pay raise, they made you go out and get a master's, right? So, but you know your standards, you know your kids, you have the caring heart. You're the part of the classroom that matters the most. But if we can add it with the intelligence or the adaptability, the immediate X's and O's of technology, where we can create personalized learning paths, where we can create different, learnings for individual students, then we can really personalize the learning space for the students. Now, these 3 components here, the wisdom of the teachers, the adaptability of technology, and our students, are the 3 components that make up a blended learning classroom. And if there are 3 components, then they should be 3 equal components. So when I say we want to use a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 classroom, 1/3 of the time, we want to let technology deliver some low-level instruction so that we don't have to deliver it to everybody. The nice thing about that is technology has tons of data that's going to help us drive our instruction. It's going to help us set up our small groups. It's going to help us know who's ready to move on and who needs remediation. 1/3 of the time, we want to release to our students. We want them to do peer-to-peer engagement. We want them doing projects. We want them really actively engaged in academic vocabulary. That leaves 1/3 for us to stand and deliver and help with the students' learning and understanding. Now, the thing about this equation is, if you notice 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, it sounds very simple, but the hardest part about this is those outside left and right, that 2/3, the 1/3 to the computer and 1/3 to the students, is what do I do? Well, that's when you get the opportunity to do teaching by walking around. So 2/3 of the time, you're out there collecting and interacting with your students, collecting data, listening to them, doing small groups, doing one-on-one, because you've taken yourself off the stage. So keep in mind this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 equation. I like to call it the CIA of blended digital curriculum to help carry that low-level instruction, guided instruction, and authentic assessment. And when I say authentic assessment, I really want peer-to-peer active engagement. All right, so you notice over on the right, I'm a mathematician. I like that triple Venn diagram. It helps me out. When I talk about DOKs in just a moment, I want you to understand that low number DOKs are the low bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. And when I talk about high number DOKs, 3 and 4, that's the top of the Bloom's taxonomy pyramid. So when we look at the triple Venn diagram and we look at digital curriculum, guided instruction, authentic assessment, if I can take the technology and allow it to deliver DOK level 1 and 2, that low level math, English, social studies, science, where kids are just consuming information, then I can help use that data to guide instruction. So then I can push my kids into higher order thinking. So when we think about the CIA and where we can do data, oftentimes we're getting data from software. It could be from Alex Math, iReady, Apex, anywhere, right? And those are built on student learning objectives. And oftentimes they give us quality data about who's below and who's mastered, who's exceeded, all of that little bit of data. And oftentimes it's in red, yellows, and greens. And it's really easy for us to put our small groups together. Now, what we want to do is we want to be careful about what's performance data and what's activity, or what we like to call a behavior data. If a kid didn't turn in their assignment, that's a behavior data. That doesn't tell me anything about if they know it. If they end up with a 0, that's because of their behavior. They didn't choose to do it. Their activity was a 0, not their achievement. So we have to be really careful about those types of things as when we're looking at data. But what do we want to get data? There's tons of different ways to get data. Of course, earlier we talked about, the NWA or the presats. We can get those state data, right? Then we have data inside of our IEPs and 504s, and the lesson data, the stuff that really is going to drive in the instruction, the checks for understandings, sample works, observation, conversations, all of that becomes really important. And we can use, like, my favorite here is Jamboard, or we can use Google Sheets or Forms, right? Oftentimes you can think about, do I want anonymous data where the kids don't have to log in, right? And I don't know who it is, but it gives me a pretty good feel for my whole class. Or do I want individual where they've signed in data on a Google form so I can get some ideas? Like, I love Jamboard. So Jamboard, if I just put Post-its up there, I don't know who put the Post-its up there, but it gives me a pretty good idea how the learning went. So when you're thinking through your use of data, think about all the different places you can get data. And the question really believes is where and what data is important for me to drive instruction in the moment. The what, the where, the when, and the how. So when we're thinking about actionable data, right? I love this Lego. I saw this on LinkedIn and I just thought, oh, this is so great. We have tons of data out there, but oftentimes it's just too much. Really focusing on 2 or 3 data points on a daily basis that are going to really help you drive instruction. And notice what happens as we sort it, we arrange it, and then we make it visually presentable. We saw that when Jackie showed us sheets, but what we really want to do is we want to go through that data that drives instruction. We want to analyze it. Well, what story is it telling me, right? How can I how can I use it to be actionable? So when you're thinking through using data, I like to call the AAA process, but it really goes back to that reflective practice that we talked about a moment ago, that what, so what, and now what? Because every time you get a data, we're always looking for patterns. We're looking to see what might be these reasons. But what you want to do when you first look at that data is, what questions can this data help me answer? Right? Can I find, kids that don't understand? Can I find kids that do understand? Can I find where there's some misconceptions? Can I find where there's already some mastery? And then I want to analyze that data. That's the so what part. When I'm looking for those patterns, what am I going to do with this data now that I have it? How is it going to help me drive instruction? And that's step 3. That's the action part. That's where we determine what actions we need to take. So the what, so what, and the now what. Let me give you an example. So here's some data. You probably have seen something like this on a Nearpod. So here's some data. It says 24 students are in the classroom. We've got a participation of 95%. We got a 66% on correct answers. But if I use critical reflection at the beginning, remember we talked about the what, the so what, the now what. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this data and I said, well, what's it telling me? And what can I determine from this data set? Well, first thing I know is there's 24 kids and they're only 95% participation. So now I'm like, well, who didn't take it? Who didn't do it? Right. And then I start looking at the data and I now want to analyze it. And I'm like, okay, now where is the mastery? Where's the misconceptions? What additional support needs? When I look at that data, especially in the correct answers, I'm like 66% correct answers. Holy smokes. That means that a third of the time the students didn't have the correct answers. What answers didn't they have correct? Should I pull small groups? Now I'm starting to think about the actions, the now what. Could I take a kid who did really well and pair them up with a kid that didn't do so well and have some peer-to-peer coaching? Maybe I need to do some one-on-one, especially for the one kid that I need to dig deeper on who didn't participate. And maybe this case, it definitely tells me I possibly need to reteach. But sometimes you get data that says, hey, the kids get it, we could move forward. So again, this is a reflective practice on you, on your instructional practices. So when you're thinking of data, I want you to think about, how is it going to help me in the moment? So again, if I'm collecting data, notice if we go back to the CIA, or the Digital Curriculum Guided Instruction Authentic Assessment, now I'm into the guided instruction. I've taken that data, I've analyzed it. I'm like, oh, now I know I need small groups, or maybe I need a large, lecture on some misconceptions that everybody's having. And then I can possibly extend it into the student peer-to-peer mentoring. This becomes important, that data practice that moves us from the what, so what, and the now what. So when we have data informed instruction, we're looking for activities that are based on data in the moment, right? Do I need to stop? I was in a classroom the other day and the teacher was just going around observing, and she noticed in the moment that the kids had misunderstanding, and she called the class together and did a large group misunderstanding and brought them all back together. Or by looking at the data, I was in another classroom in Colorado where they actually walked in the door, they did a warm up, and from that warm up, 5 questions, the teacher was able to determine who went to what small group. If the kid got all 5 questions right, they went to a different small group than the person who got only 1 or 2, which actually came to the teacher instruction. And those who got 3s and 4s had different small groups that they went through. Notice how that teacher used data to determine small group intervention. And then sometimes we just need to use data to figure out where we need to change our instruction to scaffold the learning, or possibly stretch the learning. And earlier you heard me talk about using peer-to-peer, being able to match somebody up who understands concepts with somebody who is having difficulty. And so we can match them up in a peer-to-peer. Because if we remember that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, we definitely want students engaging a third of the time in peer-to-peer. So the key point here, guys, is data to improve learning really first starts with students owning their own data. It can't just be us. And we want our kids to go through the same practices that we're going through. We want them to think about the what, the so what, and the now what. So they're setting up goals. They're looking at their own data. We may be conferencing one-on-one with them. And then we're going to definitely want to look at the data that helps us to enhance the learning activities. Do I need to do a one-on-one? Do I need to do a teacher to student? Can I match up student to student? Or do I see the data here that kid needs just a little more extra practice, and maybe I can put them on IXL? So thinking through, how does this data help me change in the moment the type of instruction that I'm giving? It also, I was really bad at this, I'll be honest with you. I would go in and I'd take a test or quiz, and I noticed that like 13 people would miss question number 24 on my quiz. And I'm like, well, did I not teach that right? I mean, 13's a lot. Is it a bad question? So this is me trying to think about not only my practice, this reflective practice, but also, can I improve my assessment? So one of the things I truly believe, I'll be honest with you, is that the core business of schools is relationships and learning. And data helps us get to that relationships. Because I will tell you, if you know your kids, if you know their data and you come up to a kid and you start talking to them about their data, they're going to feel valued. They're going to feel like you really know them. And that relationships, notice what I have here in the hierarchy, relationships and learning, and relationships comes first. We want to have that relationship with those kids. I would tell you, I was a big fan of capturing kids by heart. And so I would stand outside my classroom and I'd high five my kids. I'd ask them how the football game went. But when we closed the door, we would do mathematics. But I wanted that relationships. And so much so that not only was I high fiving kids that were walking in my classroom, but there'd be other kids coming down the hall there, and they'd be like, oh, I want to high five Miss Loomis. And because it's all about those relationships, we want to remember that data helps us create a picture of an individual student, right? We want this holistic approach. And so I'm a big fan. And if you haven't looked at learner profiles, I'm a big fan of doing learner profiles, having the kids give me some biographical data on them that talks about their strengths, their learning preferences, their characteristic traits. Those top 4 right there are ideal for the learning profiles. And you can start those at the beginning of the year to get some really good data on your students. But then you can start having the kids track their grades, and you tracking some of their tests and quizzes and even attendance that helps us give a real round picture of the student. And then we can say, look, data doesn't just belong to me, it belongs to everybody. When we use data with our students, not only are we empowering them to take control of their learning, but we're also helping them to understand that grades are not given to them, but grades are earned. And that becomes really important as we get older and kids get to the point where they're like, well, she gave me a D, but they don't understand that their behaviors and consequences to learning. They understand behaviors and consequences to disruptions in your classroom, but to learning. And the way we do that is by having them understand their data. And that becomes really important. So we can have kids do some goal setting, and we can do some one-on-one conferencing, and having them look through where they need to go and what they need to do in those datas. So right now I want to do another breakout room. I want you guys to start thinking about what data are you asking or even is available for students to collect and analyze. So again, what data are you asking or even available for students to collect and analyze? So we're going to go ahead and do another breakout room here. It'll be the same people that you were in just a moment ago. So you've already got the relationships with them. And I'll give you about 5 to 7 minutes to go ahead and do that. So again, where are you using data that you could let kids collect and analyze? I'll see you back in about 5 minutes. It's 10 after the hour. We'll see you about 15 after the hour. That that you guys had some good conversations. Remember, data is not just something that helps you in the instruction, but it should help our students as well. And so hopefully you guys had some really good conversations. We have room 3 that, and it's so funny, I love it because room 3 was the one who had spent some, all their 60 seconds and keep talking there. So I love it. I love it. Hopefully you guys are meeting some new friends from different places and getting some good conversations about data. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully you had some really good conversations about how students can become owners of their own data and help drive and be, their own self-management of their instruction so that they can analyze the what, the so what, and the now what.
And
so
as we interject real quickly, because you're talking about data in the chat box, hopefully you have links. We're collecting data ourselves here at NDE, like some information about the session and making sure you do your attendance tracker. So make sure to complete those links before the end of the session. But Kim, we were talking about data and I just had to make sure we collect some data.
Awesome. So guys, when you're using data to inform learning, here's just a couple of some tips along the way, right? Remember, don't get overwhelmed by all the quantity of data that you have access to. What we really want to do is find some quality data that's going to help us make some decision in the moment to drive instruction. So consider using some quick pre and post lesson data collections that can help drive today's lesson as well as drive tomorrow's lesson. And yes, Mary, I just want you to go back over. It says, Kristen asked if you can post the attendance link again. And then we also want to think about how to utilize a data management system. I know that in Clark, we have access to Canvas. I know some of you are using Google Classroom. I love that Jackie showed us how to use Sheets, because you want to be able to figure out how to manage all of that data, because it does come overwhelming. And then you want to identify thoughtful points to track. You can't track everything. So what's important to track? What are the things that need to be tracked to help me today, right now? And what are some things that I can track maybe, later in the week? But I want to make sure that I have some thoughtful tracking points, because especially if I'm dealing with a software program, you can run a gazillion reports, but you don't need all of them. So you want to analyze the data to identify gaps and opportunities. If you have PLCs or professional learning communities, share that data with them, kind of turn that data into actions, and make sure that you're having kids track their own data, because that's going to, two things is going to happen. It's going to help you with relationship building, right? And we really think that that's important. Remember, the core business of schools is relationship and learning, and relationships does have the hierarchy over learning. I know that, I believe that, because I know that I have kids in my classroom that didn't want to work because they didn't like Miss Loomis, right? So if I can have a relationship with a kid, it makes a totally difference. So the other thing we want to do today is, we've talked a lot. So I know over in chat, we have the link, and hopefully you guys have already sat on the link or clicked on the link to get your attendance today. But I also want you to think through, what was something that stuck with you, or what we would call a sticky point from today's session that you will take away. So what is a sticking point that you will take away from today's session? It could be something that you heard me talk about, or maybe it was something that was in your breakout rooms. So throw that up into chat. What are some sticking points from today that you will take away? 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Love it, Christina. Yeah, it's a simple equation, right? Data as a reflection in CIA. Thank you, Alyssa. Performance data versus activity data. Yeah, I will tell you, when I did the online school, Sarah, one of the things that we would say is kids are failing. But when we looked at the data, it was a lot of zeros. That really was activity or behavioral data, not performance data, right? Oh, love it. Dr. Leanne, taking ownership. Yeah, these are points that hopefully when you walk away today that you think through them. Now, I'm going to give you guys a tip here. I did this webinar in March. So I'm going to give you the recording to the webinar. It's there, and we'll actually also put it in Canvas, that we did this data recording with the webinars. Now, I do lots of different webinars for the Department of Education, and there's one coming up on this Tuesday, April 26th, that's talking about assessing student learning with digital tools. So if you really like what you heard today, I'm going to highly suggest that you go ahead and check out that webinar is awesome, because we'll be talking about different tools that'll help you collect data to assess student learning. So the way you can do that is you can go on the Nevada Digital Learning Calendar, or you can use the bit.ly here, which is the bit.ly NDE. It has to be capitalized, capital N, capital D, capital E, and a lowercase r for registration, 001. So we do have a webinar that's coming up on April 26th. We do webinars every 3 weeks. You'll notice that project-based learning and the 4 C's and the 5E model are coming up in the months of May and June. So hopefully you come and see us, because what we do is we usually start with a webinar like we did today. And then there's this ability to take it back into your classroom, that learn, grow, show you see over on the far right. You learn a little bit about it, you grow it in your classroom, and you reflect, just like we just did with the what, so what, and the now what, and you can get an additional 5 hours of professional learning from the Department of Education. And that's when we have a Canvas course for them to do so, to get through that. So again, in that workshop, we put it inside of Canvas. You learn a little different, more information about the topic, you grow that and plan it for your classroom, and then you can demonstrate by collecting some artifacts. Oftentimes it's pictures or data dashboards to reflect on the process that went through in your classroom. So hopefully you guys are interested in that. You can give me a thumbs up if you are, and hopefully I'll see you guys there on April 26th, if not in May or June. Again, the link there Mary put in there is NDE capital with a dash, lowercase r for registration 001. So guys, thank you so much. Hopefully you complete the the survey. So I have data to reflect on what, so what, and now what for me. Thanks all. It's been a pleasure. We are absolutely early. So if you have any questions or concerns, you're welcome to go ahead and throw it out there. Unmic yourself.
I'll stop the recording.